Welcome to the Fermented Homestead and welcome to the very last day of Fermented February. Today seems kind of like a sourdough sort of day, so I'm going to bring you along as my coffee pot beeps. I have a massive stash of sourdough discard, so today seemed like the perfect day to run through it with you guys. Today we're gonna be making 5 different sourdough discard recipes. If you guys aren't familiar yet with Fermented February, it is your last chance to get your comments in so that you can win one of the prizes that I'm gonna be giving away tomorrow. Those prizes are going to be a water seal crock and a Mason Tops fermentation kit. They're all based on comments from a randomly selected video, and we're gonna pick a randomly selected comment, and that person is going to win the prizes. Well, those 2 people will win the 2 prizes. So be sure that you click on the playlist that I'm going to link for you down below. All of the channels taking part in the collaboration will also be linked down below, along with all 5 of the recipes that I'm going to be going off of today. Anybody who keeps a sourdough starter, I'm sure that y'all know the pain of having tons of sourdough discard and not really knowing what to do with it, feeling guilty for throwing it away, but you do not have to. I keep my sourdough discard in this jar in my fridge. Whenever I'm ready to make a recipe, I just pull it out of the fridge and it's time to make something with it. First up is breakfast, and I'm going to be making with you a sourdough Dutch baby pancake. The sourdough discard Dutch baby, it's less of like the light and fluffy with all those cool bubbles, and it's more of a pancake meets a custard sort of texture. It's delicious. I absolutely love it, and it goes through 2 whole cups of sourdough starter discard, so you can make a pretty good dent in your collection if you have that accumulating in the fridge. I typically go off of this recipe from Farmhouse on Boone. Most of the recipes for the sourdough discard Dutch baby are pretty similar, I found at least, and this calls for 6 eggs, 2 cups of sourdough starter, 1/3 of a cup of milk, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 2 tablespoons of maple syrup or honey, and 6 tablespoons of butter. The key to making a really good Dutch baby is having a screaming hot pan when you're ready to pour the batter into it. So first thing you need to do is preheat your oven to 425 degrees with that 6 tablespoons of butter in there, so it's gonna melt down while we're mixing up our batter. All we're gonna do with this recipe is mix up everything in a bowl, not including the butter. The butter has already been put in the pan. I'm using 7 today because we have some new hens and they're laying some itty bitty little eggs. So I have 4 small eggs, 2 regular eggs, and a big old giant duck egg. And then just whisk the eggs until they're, whisked. And then add in the rest of the ingredients. And once everything is mixed together and combined, we're just gonna wait for the oven to preheat. And hopefully, if your oven is better than mine, by the time you're done mixing up all these ingredients, the oven will be preheated. So I'll bring you back when the oven is preheated and we're ready to throw this in the cast iron. Once the oven and the pan are preheated, make sure you got a glove on, pull it out of the oven. You don't wanna wait too terribly long and leave it in there, because then you're just gonna get brown butter. You're gonna get kind of a different flavor. It might even get a little bit burnt. So make sure that you're keeping your eye on it. Make sure the pan is screaming hot. And into the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. You'll know it's done when you can insert something like a butter knife or a toothpick or something in there and it comes out without any batter on it. It'll be wet, it'll look wet, but it shouldn't have any batter coming back on it. So we're all finished baking off our breakfast Dutch sourdough baby. The flavor of this recipe is gonna mostly depend on how fermented your sourdough starter is. You can also substitute an active sourdough starter, like if you want to make the sourdough starter and let it get all nice and bubbly. It will most likely, I've never actually tried that, but it does say in the recipe you can do that. I would imagine it would be more bubbly, less custardy. So give that one a try if you would like to, because this recipe is delicious. Like, you could just feed your sourdough starter at night and then bake this off in the morning. What I like to do with this is usually just put some maple syrup on top of it and just have it for breakfast. It kind of tastes like a custardy sourdough bread. You can put some jam on there. I've got some homemade raspberry jam. You can put some whipped cream on there. You can have it just plain, maybe add a little bit more butter. You can sprinkle some powdered sugar on top of there as well. Sourdough Dutch babies are a fantastic way to feed a large group of people if you have a bunch of kids, or maybe your kids had a sleepover and you got a bunch of kids hanging around. It's a fantastic way to get some super healthy food in them, as well as a bunch of protein, and it'll fill them up and they will be full until lunch. And if you have a smaller crew hanging around, you can just wait till this cools off, pop it in the fridge. It's fantastic. Reheat it. It's also delicious cold. You don't even have to reheat it. It's just a fantastic way to get some good healthy food in you, your kids, and whoever you might be serving it to. I'm gonna go ahead and enjoy my breakfast, and then I'll bring you back for the next recipe when we're ready. The next thing that we're gonna be making for lunch is going to be sourdough discard flatbread. This one is also super gut friendly. It only uses discard, no added flour. All you need for this recipe is 2 tablespoons of butter, 1 cup of sourdough discard, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and whatever seasoning that you like. This recipe calls for some everything but the bagel seasoning. So we're gonna use it. It says to start by heating a non-stick skillet over medium heat. We're gonna use our seasoned cast iron because that's what I'm gonna use. And we're gonna add in half of the butter, so 1 tablespoon of butter. Once the pan is warmed up and the butter is nice and toasty, we're gonna add in half of a cup of sourdough starter, so half the amount that we need for this recipe. And you're gonna wanna spread it around with a spatula or move the pan around. Basically just spread it out as much as you can and let it cook for a couple minutes until it looks like it's cooked all the way through. And before the top sets, that's when you're gonna wanna add the salt to it, just kind of sprinkle it on top, as well as whatever other seasonings that you're using. This recipe says that it's going to take about 3 to 4 minutes, and once the bottom is nice and toasty brown, flip it over, cook it for a couple more minutes, and repeat. And you can absolutely adjust the size of the flatbreads that you're making. You can use a bigger pan if you want a big giant one, kind of like a sourdough tortilla, and if you want a smaller one, just use a smaller amount. There we go. We got one of these sourdough flatbreads ready to go. I don't know if you can tell, but the consistency of it on the one side it's very bubbly. It almost looks like an English muffin on the inside. And it just tastes like sourdough with everything but the bagel seasoning. It's hard to go wrong with that combination. If you're aiming for something that's a little bit crispier and crunchier, I would say make sure that you spread it out much more thinly. Use less of the sourdough starter so you can spread it more thinly, and don't put as much butter in the pan. The butter, past a certain point, it kind of just absorbs into the flatbread and it's not going to make it as crispy and crunchy. But this one is absolutely delicious. I'm gonna go ahead and warm up a can of the chicken curry that I made in a recent video, and I'm just gonna have those two together. You can use this in place of really any kind of bread product that you want to. You could use it instead of tortillas. It might not bind together very well, but you could definitely use it. You can use it to dip in other things. You could also use this in the morning. It's super easy and quick to throw together. It's literally just sourdough discarded with butter in the pan, and you could make like breakfast burritos for your kids or for yourself. Next up, it's time for a sourdough snack. We're gonna make some sourdough copycat Cheezits, and this recipe is also made using only sourdough discard. As far as the flour is concerned, we're not gonna add any extra flour to it. And we are gonna need 1 cup of sourdough discard, 2 tablespoons of melted butter, a half a cup of finely shredded cheese. We're gonna use some shredded white cheddar cheese, half of a teaspoon of sugar, and 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, plus a little bit to dust on top. Well, we already have our oven preheated to 325 degrees. For this recipe, all we need to do is mix everything together in a bowl. The weather outside is getting ready to drop about 40 degrees overnight. It's supposed to be 85 degrees today, and tomorrow it's supposed to be 47. So the wind is raging out there. And once everything is mixed together in our bowl, measuring cup, whatever you're using, just pour it out onto a baking sheet lined with parchment. And then you just spread it out very thin. Good. And we're gonna pop this into the oven at 325 degrees in 2 different cycles. The first one, we're gonna cook it for 7 minutes until it kind of starts to set. Then we're gonna pull it out of the oven, score it in the shape of whatever shape crackers that you want to have, and then pop it back in the oven to finish it off for about an additional 20 minutes, roughly, depending on how thin your crackers are and whatever else can vary that time. So I got some of the crackers out of the oven. I went ahead and pulled kind of the edge pieces. Those ones are getting a little bit crispier than the rest. Right around the time that the second 20-minute timer went off, I went ahead and flipped all of the crackers over because they weren't really getting very crispy. And I think that that was a good thing to do. I have already tasted these. I'm not gonna lie, if I can figure out how to get these like super crispy, these will be better than Cheez-Its. They already taste better than Cheez-Its, but I still want that little bit of crunch, you know, that you get from a Cheez-It. So I think that the key with this is absolutely to get them as thin as possible. When I first spread these out, I thought that I was getting them too thin. Not true. Get them super duper thin and they'll get nice and crispy. The more that they cool off, also, they will get crunchier. Don't be distressed if they're not crunchy immediately, but I want some crunch out of these. So I'm gonna let these keep baking and I will bring you guys back when we're ready to make some dinner. The next recipe I'm making is for dessert. This one is probably the least friendly as far as the gut goes. If you have any issues with gluten, you're gonna wanna make this one the day before and let it set in the refrigerator overnight, and that will help to continue the fermentation process and break down some of the glutens and a lot of some of the bad stuff that can be inside of gluten, or inside of flour, I should say. I don't know if you knew this or not, but you can make a lot of different desserts with sourdough, and the one that we're trying today is a sourdough chocolate chip cookie. So you're gonna start by combining 12 tablespoons of unsalted butter at room temperature and 1.5 cups of granulated sugar in a bowl. The recipe calls to just mix it by hand because if you overmix the sugar and the butter, it can become kind of cakey. I like a cakey cookie, so I went ahead and creamed it in a stand mixing bowl with my KitchenAid. And then once that was all combined, I added in 2 tablespoons of molasses, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1 cup of sourdough discard, 1 large egg, and 1 large egg yolk. Both of mine were from ducks, so they were very large. And then I just combined it with the paddle in the mixer. In a separate bowl, you need to mix together 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/2 teaspoon of sea salt, and 2 teaspoons of baking soda. Once you get that all mixed together, then you're gonna combine it with everything else and mix it until just combined. You don't want to over mix this, otherwise it can become, I don't know what to say about it, but it's just, it won't yield a very good product. And then once everything is combined, then you're gonna add in 1 cup of chocolate chips, and then you're gonna transfer all of that to a bowl, cover it with some saran wrap, and pop it in the fridge for 2 to 24 hours. I just did it for a couple of hours because I'm gonna bake them off for dinner and my time was up. But you can do it up to 24 hours. Like I said earlier, it'll help to kind of break down some of the gross stuff or some of the stuff that can make you feel kind of gross. And while the cookies are cooling off in the refrigerator, I went ahead and got started on our sourdough pizza. This one is very similar to the flatbread because all we're gonna use is just the sourdough discard poured into the pan. But for this one, you wanna preheat the oven to 425 degrees. Once the pan is nice and hot, you're gonna add in a little bit of oil. I chose to use avocado oil. And then you're gonna pour in the sourdough discard. You want a very thin layer, as thin as you can really practically get it. You'll see it to kind of start to cook through if your pan is hot enough. Mine was not hot enough. I should have let it be in the oven for just a little bit longer, but everything still worked out. And I just cooked it in the oven at 425 degrees until I could see the top was nice and set. I just added some marinara to the top and some cheese, but you can add whatever you like on your pizza. You can put that on there. Pop it back in the oven until you get a nice golden color on your cheese. And then it's ready to eat some dinner. This recipe is definitely intended for a thin crust pizza. I have tried pouring in extra to make it more of like a doughy type of recipe. It doesn't work very well. It's hard to explain, but I just didn't care for it. You can try it, see if you like it, but I definitely did not care for it when I did it. Still really hot. Cheesy goodness. It tastes just like a nice pizza mixed with sourdough, and which is exactly what it is. Then when you're ready to bake it off, you just portion them out. It says to do about 2-inch balls, and you're gonna roll them and leave them rolled. Don't squish them or anything like that if you want them to be nice and fluffy. I just made balls roughly with them and put them on the baking sheet. The oven was preheated to 350 degrees. I popped them in there, and they need to cook for between 9 to 11 minutes. Now we're ready for some chocolate chip cookies. See if we can get it to focus on the cookie. There we go. If I had let this set in the fridge for longer, it would have been fluffier. And if I had baked it longer, it would be fluffier. But it's still a nice, good chocolate chip cookie. Nice and fluffy the way I like it. Hubby vanished, so I don't think I'm gonna get a taste test out of him, but these definitely meet my approval for sure. So I hope you guys enjoyed coming along with me in the kitchen. I certainly enjoyed having you with me. All of these recipes, depending on how you make them and how you make your sourdough starter, are gonna be pretty darn gut friendly and pretty darn tasty if you ask me. So make sure you guys are looking in the description box down below for the playlist so that you can finish out any videos that you might have missed in this playlist to enter you into winning the grand prizes tomorrow. If you want to see my last Fermented February video, be sure to click on this one right here. That'll take you right to it. Hope you guys enjoy, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Peace out, sauerkraut.